In today's easy Necron painting tutorial, I'm going to show you how I painted my 3 Translocation Shroud Overlords, and it's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, today I'm painting my 3 Necron Overlords. I've got an original one, I've got one which I converted, and one which I kit bashed out of the conversion bits that were left over. I've got a tutorial on these conversions linked in the description below. But today, of course, we are painting them. So I'm going to start with Ironbreaker, which I always do with my Necrons. Ironbreaker and a dry brush all over the miniature. Now, I have to be honest, at this stage, I'm not sure how I'm going to paint the actual shroud itself. So what I actually did is I painted one of the Overlords with a silver shroud because I thought maybe I could have a metal shroud colour. I don't run with that in the end, as you saw from the previous footage. I went for a green shroud, but I wasn't quite sure, so you'll see me painting the shroud silver on one of them, but leaving the other one black. Now, even though the first colour is a silver colour, my actual Overlord bodies themselves are going to be gold. So with the next colour, which is Lead Belcher, I don't actually paint this on the body itself. I just paint this on all of the areas which I know are going to be silver. Once that was done, I went over all of those areas again, but this time with a dry brush of Runefang Steel. Now this is more of a sort of a highlight dry brush, so I don't do this all over. I just do this on the edges, things like the blaze of the staff, anywhere which I think I want it to be a little shinier than normal. Now, I'm not actually going to do a wash over the silver. All of this dry brushing that we're doing, of course, is leaving the black primer base coat in the recesses, so there is no need to do a wash. This looks absolutely fine as a metal colour without washes. Now, when I started the hobby back in 3rd edition, Games Workshop had a different paint range, and I used Shining Gold as the gold colour for my miniatures. However, Games Workshop, of course, have changed the colours. They've got Gehenna's Gold, which is supposed to be the equivalent, but it's not. It's a very red gold. However, Vallejo do a game colour range, which effectively is the old Games Workshop colours. So I'm using Glorious Gold to match this gold into my old paint scheme. My gold is quite unique. It's not a straight gold colour, and to get it I do some really odd things which I'm just about to show you. However, it works well, it works for me, and I do like the end result. So first I mix Shining Gold with Runefang Steel. That's 2:1 ratio, 2 gold, 1 silver. And then I dry brush over all of the areas that I want gold, and I do this twice to build up the colour. I then make up another mix, again a ratio of 2:1, 2 Shining Gold and 1 Lead Belcher. And then I do what's called an overbrush. This is basically a dry brush, but with a little bit more paint on the brush, almost like a wet dry brush. I do this all over that gold area, and I do it twice, 2 coats. I then do another dry brush, but this time with just Shining Gold. Just dry brush all over the gold. This really enhances the gold colour. And then finally, right at the end, I do a light dry brush of the original mix. That's 2 Shining Gold and 1 Mithril Silver. Just a light dry brush all over. That's the gold colour itself finished, so all I have to do now is get the Nuln Oil and wash, but I only wash in the recesses. I don't splash this all over the gold. I just go into the recesses of the golds, like the rib cage and also the spine, and I just put the Nuln Oil in the recesses. Okay, so next I used Caliban Green and I painted all of the rocks and also one of the bases. I'm using a Wargaming exclusive base for one of them, and I painted that in Caliban Green as well. Okay, so next it's Warpstone Glow, and I'm going to paint green on the orbs. That's his resurrection orb and the orb on the staff. I'm also going to paint the little energy effects at the top of the staff in this colour. I've watered down the paint slightly and I'm going to do 2 or 3 coats just to build up the colour. I'm also going to paint the little orbs that are on the base at the same time. I'm also going to dry brush this colour over the rocks that I previously painted Caliban green. Okay, so next it's mute green, and I'm going to go back to dry brushing. I'm going to dry brush this colour on the little generator section on the staff. Now, continuing on with mute green, I'm going to paint the orbs, and I'm going to again do several layers of thinned down paint just to build up that colour. This colour takes about 3 or 4 layers, especially on the bigger areas, and I'm just going to leave the original warpstone glow on the outside edges of the orbs. And I'm also going to paint the eyes in this colour, just a little dot on the raised section in the middle of the eye, and I'm going to paint the orbs on the base at the same time. I use this colour, of course, to dry brush the Caliban green as well, so I did this on the base itself and also on the rocks on the bottom of the miniatures. Okay, so this is where I made the decision to use my black stone type colours for the shroud on this miniatures. Now, of course, I was painting over silver on one of the shrouds and over black on the other one. That made no difference. I'm going to do 2 or 3 coats to build up the colour. Now, even though I'm painting it like my black stone, I'm taking it to another level. I'm doing more highlights because I appreciate this material isn't actually black stone. I'm going to paint this on the same coloration I did on the skull section of my Psychomancer. So my first colour was Incubi Darkness, and I painted this all over the shroud. Now, of course, I painted the cubes over my Kit Bash one as well, because in my head that is part of the shroud. Okay, so next I just put some black on the areas that are supposed to be sand on the bases. Then I dry brushed that black with Dawnstone Grey. It's how I paint my bases. Okay, so next I used Coelia Green Shade on the shroud. I basically just painted this all over the Incubi Darkness and let it dry before I moved on to the next stage. Again, I put this wash all over the cubes as well on my Kit Bash version. So whilst the wash was drying, I worked on some stones that I found in my garden to make some rocks for the bases. And I just painted these very easily. I painted them black, then I painted them Caliban green, and then I dry brushed with Warpstone green, and finally with Mute green. Okay, so next I used Ironbreaker and I touched up all of the silver sections. Obviously the dry brushing of the gold can be a bit messy. So I went into all the silver areas. Some I hadn't painted silver yet, like the wires underneath the chest and also the little spine section on the back. I painted all of that silver and I just touched up any of the silver sections that had some gold on it. This paint is watered down a bit, so when I put it on I don't get like a harsh silver. It's almost like a feathering of the silver colour to cover up any of the gold. Now some of the areas, particularly the spine on the back, I had to do quite harsh sort of painting of the silver just to cover up the gold dry brushing. So what I did to tone that down a little bit is I put a Nuln Oil wash over that area. And then I used Runefang Steel again and just did some little highlights with a gentle brush. Okay, so next up I used Shining Gold and I painted the raised areas around the chest. I also painted some of the staff sections that I wanted gold, some at the bottom and some at the top. Now usually on the shaft of the staff I would paint the gold in like a stripy colour, so the other section of the staff would be a different colour, and the reason I do that is I like to have an extra colour on each individual character to make them different from each other, and usually it's a bright colour like a red, a blue, a purple, an orange, whatever colour it is. And I paint that on the staff and then I paint the same colour on the cloak. However, this model doesn't have a cloak, so I decided I would paint that newer, brighter colour on the orb on his back instead. I thought that way I can bring this colour into the miniature when you're looking at it from behind, where normally you would see the cloak, and also at the front on the staff. So I decided to use purple on the original miniature, so I painted purple in between the gold on the staff's shaft, And then also I went to the orb on his back and I painted that purple as well. Now for my converted one, I painted Ushabti Bone as my third colour. And again I painted that on the orb and then on the staff sections as well. Now on my Kit Bash miniature, there isn't much of a staff to introduce this new colour, and of course there's no orb on the back either. So I decided to paint this third colour just in black. It really didn't make any difference to the miniature, so black it was. Okay, so next I used a sepia wash and I washed the gold sections on the staff, and I also washed in the recesses, the joins where the Ushabti Bone meets the gold, for example, just to give those recesses some depth. I didn't actually wash the Ushabti Bone, only on the orb on the back, but not on the staff. I then used a purple wash on the purple Overlord's orb on the back. Again, I didn't wash the actual purple on the staff. I already had that sepia in the recesses and on the gold, and that was enough. I then dry brushed the bone colour on the orb using Ushabti Bone, the original colour, just dry brushed on, and then I added some white to the mix and I did another little highlight. I then did the same with the purple orb, again just a couple of little highlights just to add some texture to those raised areas around the orb on the back. Okay, so back to the Translocation Shroud. So everything was dry now and I went in with a dry brush of Incubi Darkness all over that, the original base coat's colour. I then did a dry brush of Cabalite Green, again all over. And then I did a dry brush of Sybarite Green. However, I didn't do that all over the miniature. I went for sort of the raised areas that I thought the light would be hitting a little bit more. I then added a little bit of white to the Sybarite Green. This takes me beyond how I would normally paint my black stone, gives me a little extra highlight, and I highlighted those raised areas a little bit more. Okay, I made a little mix of gold, shining gold with Ironbreaker, 1-to-1 ratio, and then I just touched up any of the areas that green had gone onto. Originally I thought it might be pretty cool to have a sort of a glow effect from the shroud, but the truth is that green over the gold with dry brushing effects didn't look very good, so I quickly stopped doing that after I tried it for the first time. So I just used this colour and I just went over all of the little areas that had some green on it. I then painted the rim of the base from my Wargaming exclusive Tomb World base. I love these bases. I've got a link in the description below where you can see my review video of these bases. I then glued all three miniatures to their bases, used some PVA glue and I glued some sand on the base and let it dry. I then painted the sand black, and it was at this stage I thought to myself, you know, there's a little wire on the staff and I really think that should be green and not silver. I think it will add a little bit more detail to the miniature. So I went back to that wire and I painted it green. I used Warpstone Glow Green and then I used Mute Green to highlight it. Once that was done, I dry brushed the sand with Dawnstone Grey and painted the rims of the bases in black. And here they are all finished. I'm really happy how these have come out. When they're all together side by side, I think they really work as a trio of Translocation Shroud Overlords. The original model, of course, the pose is pretty cool and I'm really liking it. However, I do like my Scythe conversion one, and of course the one that I kit bashed out of just some leftover bits, basically the staff and then a head that I found in my bits box, and then with those cubes which were leftover bits from my 3D printed Nightbringer. I think all three of them look really cool. I'm happy with them, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments box below. And if you want to see some of my other Necron painting tutorials, then here's a link for you to check out.